Welcome to part 6 of Prelude to the Revolution. Now we're going to take a look at the Coercive Acts. By 1774, King George III has had enough of Boston and the colonies in general and what he views as their disrespect towards the Parliament and the King. And so he's going to use his influence on Parliament to get a series of acts passed that they'll collectively call the Coercive Acts, right? Now, the colonists will give them a different name. They'll call them the Intolerable Acts. And once again, you can kind of see this disconnect here between the colonies and the Parliament and the Crown, right? They call it, the Crown and Parliament call it the Coercive Acts. We're going to coerce these guys to begin to behave themselves, while the colonists are going to call them the Intolerable Acts. This is just intolerable. It's unfair, right? So that's just another example of the fact that there's this gap that just, that neither side can get past, right, between the two. So the first of these is going to be the Boston Port Act. This was passed on March 31st, 1774, and it was solely designed as a punitive measure against Boston for the Boston Tea Party, right? It closed Boston Harbor down completely, and it removed all custom officials to the town of Salem, okay? And it basically told Boston, until that tea is paid for, Boston Harbor is absolutely closed, okay? So it's punitive. The next act, which will be passed on May 20th, 1774, is called the Massachusetts Government Act. The Massachusetts Government Act declared that the government of Massachusetts Bay Colony was fundamentally flawed. And so it consolidated the power to just the royal governor. It effectively disbanded the legislature and put all the power into the royal governor. Of course, the governor is appointed by the king. And now the royal governor has the sole authority to appoint judges, attorney generals, sheriffs, court officers, and additionally, the Massachusetts Government Act also banned any town meetings or any public gatherings unless they were specifically approved by that royal governor. So the Sons of Liberty, who had been meeting in those taverns, that's now going to be illegal. Next was the Administration of Justice Act, also passed on May 20th, 1774. This was designed to establish rule of law in Massachusetts colony. It allowed that royal governor the option to send anyone accused of any crime in some other of His Majesty's colonies or in Great Britain. So in other words, if any royal official, for example, commits a crime in Massachusetts, the governor has the discretion to say, well, we can't try this case here in Massachusetts. We got to send them to England, or we got to send them to Virginia, or wherever he wants to send them. Right? So, like, for example, in the case of the Boston Massacre back in 1770, the soldiers were put on trial in the colony and were actually defended by John Adams, right? He got all of them acquitted except for two who were convicted of the lesser crime of manslaughter, in which they had their thumbs branded with M's, okay? But now the governor could say, nope, these soldiers, if you have another Boston Massacre, he'd say, nope, these soldiers have to be sent to England to go on trial, where you pretty much know where the outcome's going to be, okay? Then there was a new Quartering Act. The Quartering Act of 1774 was passed on June 2nd. Okay, this is just an update of the Quartering Act of 1765, right? It allowed the military commanders to billet soldiers in empty houses, barns, and outbuildings, but it maintained that penalty to military officers if they forcibly imposed troops into people's private homes. So again, like I said, that Third Amendment makes you think that the British were forcing troops into everybody's houses, but it just wasn't the case. It was actually against the guidelines of the Quartering Act to do so. But again, the impression was that they could, and perception is going to beat reality every single time, right? The last one had to do with Quebec. The Quebec Act was passed on June 22nd, 1774, and it's kind of an outlier here, but it was seen by the colonists at least as part of these intolerable acts, right? This act, the Quebec Act, was actually mandated to create a permanent centralized government in the territory of Canada that had been acquired from the French, right? For the people in Canada, this was not really a big change, right? When they were under French control, they had a royal governor that was appointed by the king, and that was the authority, and that was it. Now you got the same thing, only got an English monarch instead of a French one. And of course, they also guaranteed the Catholic religion there, since a lot of these people that lived in this territory were French Catholics, right? So this was designed really just to create easier organization of the Quebec territory or of Canada, but the colonists saw this as part of the Intolerable Acts, not only because to them it was a front of this idea of liberty that was growing in their colonies, right, by creating a centralized authoritarian government, but also a provision in this bill extended the boundaries of Quebec south to include the entire Ohio River Valley. There we go again. That Ohio River Valley that's been coveted, then it started this whole series of unrest leading to the 7 Years' War and now leading up to today to 1774, where we're getting really angry with the king. And once again, the colonists have lost access to that region.